And thank you so much for providing some background on the Global Animal Partnership as well as the Better Chicken Project. At some point you said, when we added pet food partners to the program, it was a real game changer. And I'm so excited that our industry has partnered so closely with you to really advance animal welfare for chicken. It's in 80% of pet foods. And looks like, according to your slides, it's also the most highly demanded protein in the world. So before we get started today, would love to just do a round robin if everyone can go around and introduce themselves. And Anne, I'll start with you just so you can say hello in person. And then if you can go ahead and pass it off to the next person, that'd be great.
Sounds great. Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here today and really hope that we get some great discussion questions from everyone watching. And thanks so much for your support of the GAP program and looking forward to the rest of the panel. Michael, why don't you introduce yourself, please? You're on mute.
All righty. Sorry about that. My name is Michael Tierney. I'm the VP of Business Development at Norpel. Happy to be here and hoping for a great discussion with you all.
Thanks, Michael. Courtney.
Hi, guys. My name is Courtney Unruh. I'm the Tender and True Pet Nutrition. I am their Marketing and Innovation Manager. I am looking forward to our discussion today. David, on to you.
All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the inspirational talk and inspirational work. I'm David Yaskoka, CEO of Nature's Logic, 100% natural pet food, and a proud volunteer for the Pet Sustainability Coalition. Very thankful for the work of this discussion.
And Chris.
Oh, Chris.
Hey, morning, everybody. My name is Chris Bolden. I'm a senior sales manager for Wayne Farms, sitting out here in Westminster, Colorado, and looking forward to having a conversation.
Woohoo, go Colorado. All right, wonderful to meet all of you, and it's such a treat to have representation from a critical supply chain in our industry, suppliers, brands, and then Global Animal Partnership joining us as well. So thank you for giving us this well-rounded perspective. So one of my first questions, Anne, is for you. Can you help me understand the difference between traditional farming that might not take into account animal welfare and just that first level, right? So level one under your certification. Can you explain the gap in those two things?
Sure. Really the basic difference between sort of commercial agriculture and GAP Step 1 is we set requirements for everything. So if you think about it, we ensure there is a certain amount of space that each bird has for its entire life. We set very specific requirements around their diet, what they can and cannot have. So for GAP Step 1, it means that animals are raised without the use of antibiotics, which for poultry also includes ionophores, which are not chemically or medically relevant to humans, but are very important to the industry. It also means that animals are raised without animal byproducts. In addition to that, we also make sure that the animals get a normal night and day program schedule, which is unusual, and also that they have enrichment, so things in their environment that allow them to do the things chickens want to do.
All right, thanks for that basic explanation. And sorry, but there's one follow-up question to that as well, which is, sure. I now understand the difference between traditional and Step 1. What are some of the primary things that take you all the way up to Step 5?
Yeah, basically the best way to think about the program is as you move up the steps, the birds get a more natural environment. So Step 2 means an enhanced indoor environment, more space, more enrichments, windows, so natural light. If you go to Step 3, that's a seasonal outdoor access program, means the birds go outside some of the year when the weather's nice, stay inside when it's not. Step 4 means the birds always have access to pasture. Step 5 is small groups of birds that are only ever on pasture and are specialty breeds. And Step 5 plus means the birds never leave the farm, that they are raised on the farm and they're also processed on farm.
Interesting. All right, well, thanks for sharing some of the specifics between all of the steps. And I'm curious, this is a question for the suppliers that are joining us today. So I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit about how long it took you to become a certified GAP supplier, and what did you have to change in that process?
I guess I'll catch that because I'm the producer on this one. It took us about 6 months to, back and forth of working with the third-party auditors to get things up to the certifications. There were a difference in there's a 100-point checklist that our farmers are using in this process. So, you have to get used to those checkpoints. And then just make sure that you're living with it. But it's once you're into the motion, we've noticed that our younger farmers are attracted to these programs, and it's been easy to recruit. But I don't know if I veered off, but that's kind of how I'd look at it.
All right, thanks. How about you, Michael?
Our role is a little simpler than the actual raising of livestock. So really, we're just the bridge between the GAP producers and the pet food manufacturers. So there was a process of getting onboarded, but our main role is basically to keep and maintain chain of custody and provide a linear and direct line from the producer to the pet brand. It's quite often in the pet food industry that, different suppliers might go into one big pile and you could be getting material from a variety of different producers, where on the GAP program, it's got to stay completely traceable from the point of processing at the GAP processor to Norpel and then to whatever pet brand we may be working with.
Well, Michael, I can't tell you how useful it would be if there were more intermediary players that could help protect that traceability with some of our other proteins. So really appreciate that. Our members come to us all the time looking for supply of transparent and traceable ingredients that meet certification standards. So really appreciate that role that you're playing. All right, so I have a question for our brands that are joining us today. I'm wondering, how have consumers responded to the certification on pack?
I guess I'll take this first. So we actually launched our brand with the GAP certification. So our initial product offering, we've always had the GAP certification. So there was never any, getting consumers used to it. Ultimately, a lot of studies have shown that some of the younger generations are really, pulling towards some of those certifications as well as sustainability. So ultimately, it's been more so getting people educated on what exactly GAP means and all of the work that goes behind the scenes on those ranches. So primarily, I think our goal has been first and foremost to get consumers educated and really understand, all the way from chickens, cattle. We have several different proteins that are all GAP certified. So ultimately, it's just trying to get people on board and educated with what exactly that certification means.
And you, David?
Well, yes. Well, I'd also love to say, as someone who has not yet, with Nature's Logic, put the GAP seal on our bag, but is looking forward to that, it is one of the most asked for improvements that we hear for our products. Third-party certifications in general, but GAP in particular. And for me, that's critically important. And I'd love to point everyone to the Pet Sustainability Coalition 4-factor framework for sustainability in proteins. And of course, no doubt, and you spoke most eloquently, of course, to the animal welfare component. A question for you, and perhaps for you, Chris, along the way, is I think you may well speak, GAP may well speak to the other factors, including, of course, sustainability, environmental sustainability, which you touched on, but also social elements. What's good for farmers? I would not be surprised that if GAP certified farms do a lot better there than a typical farm. And then further, maybe even more down the road, is what's good for animals, the nutritional element. Last thing I'll just reveal, what allows Nature's Logic to be 100% natural with no synthetic vitamins is that we use a lot of meat. we use more meat than the competitors. So that's great for animals, but we know that has animal welfare and environmental impact. And I just think you're just clearly a key part of the solution to that problem there. So,
yeah, David, so yeah, maybe in response, Chris, can you talk a little bit about just kind of farmer life and how this has increased quality of life or well-being for you and the network that you work with of producers?
Yeah, like I said, we you have to go out and talk to these growers and get their buy-in on it. You just can't walk up and show up and say, "Guess what? You're Gap Farm." So you have to get out there and explain what we're doing, explain the process. Like I said, it has surprised us that we've been able to attract the younger generation of growers, that they appreciate the checklist, they appreciate the interaction on that, and they generally appreciate that they're getting to make some change in the food chain. So that's been a nice side effect of as we move forward and initiated this.
All right, and Anne, maybe you can respond to the nutrition component. So can you talk a little bit about how GAP certified chicken has, I know you mentioned with the University of Guelph that you were studying this. What are some of those results?
Yep. Yeah, there's. I'd also like to add on the farmer sustainability side of things that it's one of the big things that farmers love about the program is that it does bring them a little bit more into their pocket. Different species, and depending on integration of the supply chains, has different values, but it has been one of the things that farmers feel they're rewarded for what they're doing, which is a big plus in the program. And since we've been around for so long, that reward continues to impact them in their pocketbook. So that's great. In terms of the nutritional side of things, some of that work is still forthcoming from the university, but they have looked at sort of the impact of the diet fed to the birds, and how that's having a really healthy, high quality diet does also make it much easier to raise the animals without antibiotics. So it's a real key sort of tenet of that. And also, in addition to looking at some of the nutritional aspects of it, also looking at the meat quality and how that impacts sort of the cookability, if you like, as well as the texture, how well it can take marinades, how it cuts, all of those sorts of things. So some really exciting work. Hopefully, as the next couple of months, we'll see the final bits of results of that work.
Well, that's very exciting. We also have partnered with University of Guelph on some research that we're doing. I know they're real leaders in this space. So I'm excited to see a lot of that data. And David, good point around kind of, while some certifications, while they're focused on one area, they end up having residual effects in really great ways across the board. So I think that was a really great point. And Chris, I think, that's interesting that it took you about 6 months. We hear the organic process can sometimes take years, right? Multiple years for producers to achieve. And that can be really financially difficult, right? Because they're spending all the additional resources to become an organic producer, but they can't actually receive those higher premiums for 2 years until they've received that certification. And that gap of 2 years can really decrease accessibility of that system. So it's really good to hear that from your side. And I'm curious about all of your producers. So do most farms go 100% GAP certified? Do they start with a percentage of their total farm? And then also, are you generally getting really positive feedback that the premiums you're able to collect at this new standard are really covering all the costs of the certification process?
Yeah, typically what we actually... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say when we work with new suppliers, and Wayne Farms was one of them as well, we suggest actually that people start small and start in a sort of a geographic area that they can work out the quote unquote bugs of the program, learn how it all works, and then sort of scale it up from there. But we really want people to get started and be able to have some throughput in the system so that they can start to see payback a little bit easier. Because 100% of the animal has to be certified before it can be used. It often, requires some mapping, but it has been, a really important part. And I think one of the surprising things of working with us is, telling people to almost slow down a little bit, get it straight, and then move forward. And so far, everybody always would like more, but so far we've heard that the premiums are covering not only the cost of certification, but the cost of compliance and a little bit more in their pocket as well.
So Michael, I had a question for you. So you and I have had an opportunity to connect individually. A lot of times we just saw each other at Pet Food Forum. And one of the things you were talking about is that sometimes supply can be problematic. So when we look at things like MSC certification of fish, that we all want to achieve this standard, but that there are ebbs and flow in the supply. And there's a lot of effort from more regional and small fisheries to bring really sustainable fish to market, but that they're not at the scale that they can really go through that certification process. So I'm curious, from your perspective, on the fish side of things, how is this launch of this new certification going? Is it providing a bridge that you've been hoping for? What response are you getting from the fisheries community?
So we've worked with GAP kind of indirectly, just as a brain to pick as they develop their farm-raised salmon program. I think it's an excellent opportunity to group seafood into GAP's animal welfare programs. There's a lot of different seafood accreditation programs. There's some that you can look at one website and they give you 2 thumbs up, and you can look at another website and you get 2 thumbs down. So the kind of the information and the different accreditation programs is a little bit cloudy on seafood. With GAP getting involved, that provides just a multi-protein avenue for seafood to be grouped in, with food, a group that's dedicated to working with sustainable producers there. So I think that's a good expansion for GAP to get into farm salmon, because that's definitely a growing and expanding sector in aquaculture. For us, we've seen definitely a spike in interest in accredited programs, so on both seafood and land proteins, and GAP has been one of the easier partners to work with, and we know their quality assurance and schemes and schematics on how they set their standards. So it's a pretty clear program for us to get behind, and basically, that's when we step in and build a bridge from the producer to the pet brand. On seafood, for us, we kind of work with companies big and small. So obviously there's a big push for getting accredited seafood. I think the one risk that could be out there is if everyone runs on the same eco label or the same accredited species, there could be a shortage, and you don't want to have a sticker on your bag and not be able to put that product in the bag. So we try and help pet food companies navigate that decision-making process where, understand their goals and their objectives, but also try to lead them away from being put into a corner. So that's where we really have to work with the accrediting bodies and develop a good relationship with them, so we can help make or help guide pet food brands in making informed decisions.
Yeah, so that brings up a question for you, Courtney. I'm curious about supply. So as a brand who has committed 100% to GAP certified proteins, is it helpful for you to have kind of 1 through 5? Do you achieve 5 in one place and 3 in another? Or how do you navigate supply issues? Have you had any issues? Kind of give us some insights.
Yeah, luckily our chain of custody, we actually source our own meat. So luckily we don't really have to navigate those kind of issues, we are able to source from the same farms. And we do actually have a variety of steps based on the product. So for instance, like our organic product is a step 3 versus a step 2 or step 1 with chicken and brown rice. So ultimately, being able to really diversify which step we're utilizing in which product has really allowed for us to use various farms. So really, we haven't necessarily ran into any supply issues thus far. So I feel like I need to knock on some wood here. But yeah, so I will say that, you would think that we would have some issues with supply. But the other good part about sourcing our own ingredients is that we really do have some really great relationships, including with Gap, but also with those suppliers one-on-one. So we're really able to secure some of those ingredients and really just bring them to fruition. And that includes any new products as well. So again, we've got some really great connections, and that's really done well for us.
All right. So Anne, I had a question for you. You said there are 3 primary suppliers that are responsible for about 80% of the chicken that's in the market. I hope I quoted you correctly. Can you tell us who those suppliers are and what your plan is? I mean, it seems like if you can influence 3 and you're going to impact 80%, that would be a huge win for you. So I'm curious, who are they and what are you doing to try to partner with them?
Yeah, it's actually the primary breeding companies. So these are the companies that produce the what we call the parent stock, or the breeding animals for the entire chicken industry. So this is Aviagen, Cobb Vantress, and Hubbard. And so as part of us going to work on our Better Chicken project, we engaged with them right away to not only pick their brain about what we wanted to achieve and, their feedback on what that would look like, but also with the Guelph study, they supplied genetics into the study, and, also gave feedback, and just have been really great partners working with us. It's big change for them, but also big opportunities. So really it's about those sort of relationship building and making sure that they have a seat at the table, and that they always say it takes a village. Well, it really does, but also, just making sure that they're there and part of it, and keeping the lines of communication open and listening to their concerns, as well as them listening to ours, and how we can work together. So it's been great, actually.
When do you expect the final results to be released?
Any day now. I'm just waiting.
I know that feeling.
Any day now. So I'm hoping that actually by next week we'll have all of the sign-offs so that we can release it all officially. But we're ready to go. We're just waiting for all of the sign-offs to come in.
So Anne, I have another question for you, and it's kind of a philosophical question. So I was looking at the slide you had with the smaller breed and the bigger breed, and I was thinking, okay, if we go to smaller birds, then do we have to kill more birds in order to meet the demand, let's say, of just the pet food industry? And is it better to, first you could answer that question, and if we have to harvest more birds because they're smaller and therefore we need more of them to reach the supply amount, is that better because they had a great life? Or is it better to minimize death and go with these large breeds even if their quality of life is low? What do you think?
It's a great question, actually, and definitely there's a lot of sort of ethics in there. I mean, one of the things I would say is that in the industry as it's structured today, birds are grown to a variety of sizes, right? So you might have a small bird, like a 5 or 6 pound bird, and then you might have some big, larger roaster birds, and that go to different uses. But at the end of the day, I think, for us, it's really about making sure that the quality of the life of the bird is, where we want it to be, that birds can be birds, but also it does have to be economically viable. Will we have to grow more chickens to meet the demand? Potentially. If we're really successful, yes, potentially that may be the case. But it may also be the case that if we can utilize as much of this bird as possible and make it super sustainable, have less mortality, have less muscle myopathies and other types of less mortality, then if all of those things together, we may end up sort of at net zero. I think we'll end up, but I think for us, it's always been about what can we do better. And it's not only the quality of the life of these birds, but the birds that produce them. this change will have a huge impact on their life. And if you think about 68 billion animals, that's just the ones we eat. There's, a number of other, millions of animals that actually produce those. And I think if we look at that impact, we absolutely have to do something. But I do think that we're not looking to go back to 1920s. We're not looking to eat laying hens, which have very little meat on them. So I think there's a happy compromise there of having, a good bird that produces chicken, but maybe giving a little bit up on the production side. And I think as consumers change how they eat, as people reduce the amount of meat in their plate and add other alternatives or vegetables, grains, then I think we can fit right nicely in with that as well. And I think with pet food taking other pieces, I think that's a huge, huge win.
Yeah, so I can just say when I travel overseas, I'm often like, oh my gosh, this chicken tastes so amazing. So if I'm in South America or Mexico or in Europe, and it must be a breed difference, right? Because I come back to the US and they're enormous, breasts growing on these chicken, and they just don't have much flavor. So I look forward to a breed change in the hopes that also means amazing flavor palette. But you had some interesting points around utilization. So I would love to ask Chris and Michael both around the pet industry's opportunity to improve the overall utilization of each animal. So that's both on the fish side and seafood side as well as the chicken side. But can you talk about the pet industry's role and how that might impact you if we're able to increase utilization?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think once we get through this interesting time of production that we're getting through, we value homes for all byproducts. So, I mean, I think that's a lot where, the relationship goes here. And also, I mean, it's a challenge right now getting people out there to get work to be done. So I think in the future, Michael and I have talked, several times about what the future brings, and it's honestly getting through right now. But it's just remember when you're looking at the models that we're in now, where people are growing these big 8-pound, 9-pound birds, that creates a different amount of byproduct than when you're viewing a 6-pound bird. So one of the jokes in my office is, me being in charge of the GAP program, is I get a call probably once a month. I need to know what your price on jumbo gap meat is. So you just need to understand that doesn't exist anymore, that we're really looking at density, spacing, and stuff like that of how we're realizing what we're accomplishing.
Michael, anything you want to add about utilization?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I think kind of twofold. Just from an industry perspective, I think that's kind of an untold story of the pet food industry has in the food industry, like as the overall in the whole food sector, is that it does help utilize the full animal, right? So as human beings, we eat salmon fillets, we eat chicken breast. There's a whole rest of the body of fish or the body of the chicken that's left over that, it could go into organic waste, it could go into rendering. But I think overall what pet food does is it provides a food outlet, just like 100 years ago, people would give their table scraps to dogs. It's making sure that the food that's there gets utilized and consumed and not thrown away or disregarded. So that's kind of Norpel's success, has been upcycling food from large manufacturers, big fish farms, big fish cutting houses, all the way down to small fisheries who may have been paying to throw away their fish waste into a dumpster, or go into animal byproduct meal where the gloves and plastic, all that's cooked up together, where we'll try and work with processors to upcycle that raw material, value it so we can put into the wet pet food market. And I think you're upcycling the ingredients and you're kind of adding more value economically to that part, but you're also kind of valuing the animal more so doing that. So I think the more you can have the animal utilized for food, consumed as is, not cooked, not doing a whole bunch of different stuff to it, is kind of putting a little bit more on the life of the animal and what it was intended for.
All right. Well, thank you so much for those insights. We're actually going to hand it over to Melissa to take some audience questions. And I think we'll extend maybe just 5 more minutes since I went a little long, so that we make sure we get to take some questions. So if you have any that you haven't entered yet, make sure you get those in the chat box, and I'll hand it over to Melissa.
Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you to all of our panelists. We've got a lot of great questions coming in from the crowd, so I'd love one to take one over to Anne. Anne, one of the growing biggest trends in pet industry is alternative proteins. And as we see increasing pressure from alternative proteins, can you talk a little bit about strategy around expansion of maybe species, and what is your strategy into adding new species to these kinds of certifications?
So we had not had any new standards actually until this year. And so we now have a new dairy standard, just to add that as a protein. And then also with the addition of salmon. After that, because we also have bison and goat in addition. But after that, we would be looking at adding additional aquaculture species. So trout, we're actually working on a trout standard right now, as well as looking at some of the other poultry species. Like we know duck is of a big interest, in quail. And so those are other ones that we're looking at as well. It really becomes a sort of a resource allocation for us because we're a tiny little wee team. But there, I would say consistently get questions around duck, quail, and trout. And so those we've earmarked for new species that we'll be working on.
Great, thank you. Another question that we're getting is, how does GAP, if GAP does at all, work with other certifications, specifically maybe organic or regenerative organic?
Yeah, that's one of the things actually we as an organization have been trying to do more of. And really, I think, stronger together. So GAP right now is part of a global coalition with other animal welfare groups. The acronym is GAWA, G-A-W-A. .org. And so this is other animal welfare organizations around the world that we can partner with to help really spread the word about animal welfare. But we've also looked to work with Textile Exchange for leather and hides and wool. Have also, talked to some other certifications around regenerative agriculture. Definitely, with organic bundling, being able to go out and do more than one audit at the same time. And so I've really talked to our certifiers and other sort of programs to see if we could work together and get more audits done at the same time, because that also not only reduces audit fatigue for the growers, but then you only get the cost of one travel cost per auditor. So there's a variety of different ways that we're looking at this. We're also looking at technology. So adding databases so companies can talk to one another, adding tech into the system to try and make things more efficient. We trialed a bunch of things with COVID and not being able to go out on farm. And so I feel like this is an area that we've really worked really hard to try and let it be known loud and clear that we're really interested in partnerships.
Great, thank you. I'm loving some of the questions that come in, and also what Anne, you just said. We have a lot of questions around upcycled food. Anne just mentioned the Textile Exchange. Great news is Upcycled Food Association and Textile Exchange is actually our next speakers. So very excited to hear from them. I've got a really great question for Chris. From a producer point of view, how do you balance the demands for sustainability from your consumers around certain certifications with cost?
Well, I mean, we've taken the position that we will grow what the market asks us to sell them, So, we started GAP really as, we did the marketing research and people thought us chicken guys were kind of full of it and we needed a third-party auditor. So we looked at GAP and said, you're the hardest one to pass and it makes the most sense. So we're hardy people, so we're going to go after it. So we just have to manage it in cycles. And your grow out cycles and say, all right, we have 390,000 birds in our GAP program right now. So we go by barn, we go by day. And as we build coalitions and relationships with people that said, okay, we're going to start doing this, then we said, okay, we're going to add these birds down, your output's going to be this. And we just kind of chip away at one of our conventional programs to convert over. So it's not a build it and they will come. It's let's have a conversation, figure out what you need, and we will build it to be successful together.
I love that perspective. Thank you so much, Chris. I've got a great question for David and Courtney. With the consumer demands for sustainability and the increasing focus on certifications from retailers, how do you balance which certifications to go for? There's so many different ones, from organic to GAP. How do you, as a brand, pick where to focus?
Thanks, David. I will say, like I said earlier, we did launch with GAP. So currently GAP is kind of leading our certifications. We also actually do have USDA organic as well as MSC SKUs. So I wouldn't say that we necessarily partition or segregate based on certification alone. What we're looking for is certifiers and third-party organizations similar to GAP that really help prove our sustainability claims. So obviously animal welfare is one of those big ones. So I will say that GAP has been a tremendously great partner to have. I think that their certification process is great, as well as the stages and steps. I mean, even just the base step has just created such a great atmosphere. And really, everything that they've done in the past, I'd say, year, I've noticed a really big shift in both their branding and just education across the board. So ultimately, they've been kind of our go-to and kind of our gold standard for what we aim to shoot for. But like I said, Certify Who Better is kind of our tagline, because we ultimately try to find any certified meat. So, David, I don't know if you have anything to add for Nature's Logic.
Well, one, I love the question. I think for me, the most important thing, and Courtney, I think it is for you too, is authenticity. We are seeing an increasing wave of greenwashing. We'll see animal rescue washing, if you will. And we rely on the Pet Sustainability Coalition to help be our moral compass, if you will, on what certifications are authentic, which certifications are really moving the needle on animal welfare and sustainability. And you've been leading that charge for quite some time. We appreciate it. And so in part, we want to back what look like the winners, authentic winners that consumers are starting to recognize.
Great. Thank you, David. I've got a really great question for either Anne or Michael or Chris. I don't know who's the best one. Anne, you did such a great job covering sustainability of GAP from an environmental point of view in your presentation. We've got some questions. Are there any hard studies like LCAs to quantify the environmental impact or carbon emissions of GAP certified products?
Not yet. That was actually something that we've been trying to do. Is to get some funding to be able to do that. There are little snippets of information around that, we're looking if we can't get a LCA done to try and piece together, but it's definitely something we've been trying to quantify. And I think we've been wanting to look at it as well by sort of the different type of production systems that are in the GAP program. But yeah, definitely something on our list of want to do's for sure.
Perfect.
But as of yet, nothing. We don't have any hard data just yet.
Not coming in the report next week, for example.
No, no.
Perfect.
Not yet.
I've got a great question for Michael or Chris. What stage of GAP is typically targeted by producers? Is there a starting point? We're going to start at level 1 and go from there? Or is it more, we're going to move a percentage of our farm over, like Ann suggested?
Well, it's kind of an evolution thing, like I was talking about the last time. 2 fits the best of what our current infrastructure is. When you get up into the organic side of things, then you're switching grains that you have to get certified through. You're switching how your plant is processing and making sure everything is organic. And you can't switch a production cycle in a day. So like I will run first shift, I will run my GAP birds, and then second shift, I will run my NAE veg fed birds. So that was our vision, or that was our path, because it was like, okay, we can fit this in without great changes. And then we take, to our R&D side and really more of our feedback from our partners of, okay, we want to go up to this and we need to start working on, to get to gap 3, we need to do this and stuff like that. So for us, 2 was the best fit that made the first step the easiest for us as we evolved.
Makes sense. Michael, are you finding farmers coming to you and saying, hey, we're trying to meet this specific demand, or are you feeling it more from the other side?
So our relationship with Gap has been great. They've been kind of introduced us to a lot of different producers with a varying level of both their ratings as well as their potential volume for the pet food sector. I would say that we've seen interest across the board. I would say that if people are going to maybe put the Gap logo on their website or on the pack, they probably want something that they feel comfortable that the rating wouldn't change or the supplier wouldn't fall out of good faith. So I think Gap Level 2 is often the easiest, but we definitely have had interest from pet brands that are looking for higher ratings. So I would say the interest is kind of across the board in how different brands want to differentiate themselves in the market. So really kind of interest across the entirety of the spectrum.
Perfect, thank you. I've got a quick question on pricing. Along with that, does pricing typically work, like a level, Gap Level 1 chicken is this price, but Gap Level 5 comes at a premium? Or how does that typically work? More on a supply side? I don't know. If Anne, you might be the best person to answer this one.
I actually don't think I am, because it's really dependent on volume and like how frequently you're taking that volume and how much and which cuts and transportation and all of those bits and pieces. So we don't really have great insight into pricing. At least I don't. Maybe Diane on my team might, but I definitely don't. Maybe Michael or Chris might have a better sense of that.
Chris, you want to take it?
Yeah, here's the best way I can kind of phrase it. And it goes back to the conversation about density. So you understand that there's 3 sizes of birds that Anne has talked about. We have small, medium, and large in the poultry industry. So there's something out there called the Urnaberry market, and that is what we all trade off of. And if you notice, there's 3 different prices. There's the select price, the medium price, and the jumbo price. So the best way for me to kind of look at that is say, all right, you're taking the jumbo out of the equation, and now you're pricing yourself at medium. So you've got to go look at and that's at a commodity level. That's not adding all the bells and whistles of what we're doing here. But that would be the simplest way to kind of look at it, to say, all right, I'm out of jumbo bird. I'm now in medium bird. Looking at the medium bird market, this is where my pricing floor is. I think that would be the easiest way to kind of go at it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Michael, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say, as the rating goes up, I would say that the volume would be more limited and the supply chain challenges will probably be heightened, right? But I think that there is a premium. People are looking for ways to differentiate themselves. So I would say there is a slight premium. And then as you go up the rating scale, there's probably a more limited capacity. And so I think both the producers and the brands would expect to pay more. Also, with those limited offerings, the supply chain challenges can get difficult. And that's one way that we've kind of found a niche in providing a service for both the producers and the brands, is that even if a stage 5 or a small beef processor only has a couple thousand pounds a week available, we might have trucks in the area that can get that up on a full truckload to minimize the transportation costs. So we've kind of used our supply chain to flex those smaller producers and connect them to pet brands, where if we had to send in a truck dedicated for a couple thousand pounds, it can get on, the economics can get kind of wonky pretty fast. So it's really finding the material and putting it together in a supply chain that can get it to market at the lowest cost possible, and that will help those premium producers get a premium return.
That makes a lot of things. Then thank you for those thorough answers, everyone. All right, I want to thank all of our chat. We have so many questions in this chat box, y'all. So thank you so much. I'm going to pose one more to Anne, and then I'm going to pose one more to the group. But I really appreciate all of you sticking around and giving us such insight on this topic. Anne, quick question. What is your audit fall rate, and what do you do if you, as one of your third-party certifiers, goes out to a farm and they don't pass, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to make sure that everyone understands is that there is, depending on what it is, there is an opportunity for the farm to correct what it maybe isn't in compliance for at the time of the audit. So maybe they don't have a record in place. Maybe there's something, they don't have enough enrichments. So there are opportunities for a correction. There's a certain amount of time that they have to do that. And then if they're able to substantiate that correction, then they can still achieve certification. We do, unfortunately do have some farms that maybe don't make it, but as part of any new farm coming on board, we actually offer some prep services for them. So we help them sort of evaluate whether or not they're ready. And if they're missing things, we help them get ready, because we really don't want people to go to the expense of getting an audit, not to pass. But at the same time, if you're cheating and we catch you, then you will be decertified. But really, we do try to have people be successful, because we are trying to be that vehicle for change, and you really can't do that unless you work with people.
Great. Thank you, Anne. All right. We've got one more question that I'm going to pose to everybody. It came up in the chat, but also I can speak. I get this question all the time. So I'm really excited to hear all of your perspectives. Quick 30 seconds with everybody. We'll start with whoever wants to start. What is your opinion on insects as pet food? Specifically, we get crickets, we get black fly. Why can't I say this? Larva all of the time. Quick, what are your thoughts? And then we'll call it. David, you want to start? I'll pick on you.
I don't have a great answer. I'll say that nature's logic can become 100% natural without synthetics because of feeding trials. Those feeding trials use chicken and pork and other ingredients. So we're not at liberty to use insects right now.
Thanks, David. Anne, I saw you nodding when I asked the
Yeah,
question.
this has come up recently. This has come up recently, and just as a bit of perspective, because we hadn't really thought about it, but we had someone ask us about our opinion on insects, and the concern from the animal advocate community is that insects, if they're eating what they would naturally eat, is probably fine, but they're often being fed product from the meat industry, and so they sort of see it as sustaining commercial production and not actually really benefiting anything if you're feeding them meat from the commercial industry. And so it was strongly suggested to us that we do not allow the inclusion of insects in our program for that reason.
That's a very interesting perspective. Thanks, Anne.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, yeah. Chris, Courtney, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I know of some studies of some groups that have actually already put that into action in their commodity program, looking at trying to get benefits and features of that. And this is one where, I'm always curious, is it better to upcycle an item or create a new item into the cycle? So we just talked about byproducts and stuff like that. Can we use those before we have to introduce another one? Would be my philosophical question to you guys.
I'm loving the variety of opinions. Michael, Courtney, would you like to weigh in?
I think just from the marketing aspect, I would be more so curious if pet owners, I guess stateside, are even quite ready to adapt to an insect-based pet food, because I think that, again, from a marketing standpoint solely, I'm just not totally sure that people are quite on board with that thought process yet. And they may get there, but I think I would just need to dive in a little bit further to understand if there is even necessarily a demand for it at this point.
Michael, last word.
Yeah, real quick, at first I thought it could be a really interesting way for handling food waste, but as I understand, they have to have a pretty strict diet so you're not passing on problems through the bugs. But then on the other side, I lived in Africa. I've seen people eat bugs, so I'll take a problem-free philosophy and just say a Hakuna Matata on the bugs.
I used to live in Africa too, Michael. I appreciate that perspective. Well, thank you all so much for your incredible insight, for sticking around, answering our myriad of questions. As we at Pet Sustainability Coalition say often, 80% of the environmental impact of the pet food and treats is this protein. So this is such an important conversation, and it's such a important strategic initiative for Pet Sustainability Coalition. So thank you all so much for your time and your insight today.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.